All right, so this is the last of these first few review lessons looking at operations, most recently with fractions. And so first to review how to multiply proper fractions, as opposed to, not so much improper fractions, but as opposed to mixed numbers, which I'll get to in a bit. But to multiply proper fractions, it's probably the simplest operation. You just multiply, let's say, times numerators together. And denominators together. So top times the top, bottom times the bottom. So of all the operations with fractions, this multiplying is always the quickest. So in this case, there's 3 times 2, which is 6, over 4 times 5, which is 20. That said, as always, when working with fractions, we don't want to leave it unless it's already in simplest form, and this is not. For example, if I look at the numbers 6 and 20, I can divide each by 3. And so if I divide the numerator by 3, wrong color. If I divide the numerator by 3, I take that back. I can't divide them both by 3. I can divide them both by 2. If I divide the numerator by 2, I get 3 whole. If I divide the denominator by 2, I get 10 whole. And there's our best answer. Nice and quick. I will say as well, if this makes sense, you can actually reduce or simplify your answer before you actually multiply. For example, I look at the original question. You may notice when you're multiplying, and this always works when we're multiplying, I have 2 over 4 right here. Well, I know that 2 over 4 is the same as 1 over 2, so I can kind of reduce them in advance. I can change this to 1 over 2 right now. I can reduce it before I get started because I can see that 2 over 4 is the same as 1 over 2, and then multiply. And notice if I then multiply, I get 3 times 1, which is 3, and 2 times 5, which is 10. It's a little bit more abstract to understand, but it is a bit faster. OK, but in general, multiplying fractions extremely quick. The biggest hurdle is usually our own lack of confidence. We see fractions, we assume it has to be complex. Dividing fractions is not quite as quick, but it's close. What always works is to multiply by the reciprocal of what you're dividing by. To divide proper fractions, multiply by the reciprocal. Ooh, helps so I can spell. Divide by the reciprocal. Now again, hopefully this sounds familiar, but if I look at this, dividing by any number, so in this case dividing by 2/5 is always the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 2/5 is 5/2. And vice versa is also true. Multiplying by any number is the same as dividing by the reciprocal. It's a really essential connection between multiplication and division. But it's really useful when dealing with fractions because, as we just saw, multiplying with fractions honestly is really quite easy. We don't need common denominators or anything. So 3/4 divided by 2/5 is the same as 3/4 times 5/2. And now again, I just multiply my numerators together. 3 times 5 is 15. Multiply my denominators together. 4 times 2 is 8. In this case, my answer is in lowest terms. It's just an improper fraction. And so I really should change this to a mixed number. 8 goes into 15 1 whole times, almost 2, but not quite. 8 goes into 16 twice. So I can take 8 out of 15 once, and I have 7/8 left. That is the answer I really want us to stay with. OK, so even with dividing, though, you don't need common denominators. You just want to remember that anytime you divide by any number, it's not just with fractions, but it's useful with fractions. Dividing by any number is always the same as multiplying by its reciprocal. All right, so what if you're dealing with mixed numbers? Well, to multiply or divide with mixed numbers, like we have here, what's always helpful, and you don't actually have to, but I think it's quite helpful, is to change those mixed numbers to improper fractions. So I'll have one example for multiplication, one example with division. So if I look at this, I'm multiplying, that's nice, but I have this mixed number, which is fine, but I want to change it to an improper fraction. So I go the whole number times the denominator, which is 4, add it to the top, you get 5 over 2 times 4/5. All right, I can multiply this right now, or I want to do something I mentioned earlier. I can see that I can actually reduce this a lot in advance. Okay? Actually, no, I'll do that afterwards. First, let me just go 5 times 4, which is 20. 2 times 5 is just 10. I get 20 over 10, which is the same as 2 over 1, or just 2. That's definitely the best answer, 2. That's a big marker. All right, so the answer is 2. However, I will say, if I just go back in time a moment, if I look at this step right here, I can get to that 2 a little bit faster. Not that this took very long. But I can see I have 5 over 5 is the same as 1 whole. I can just kind of simplify that right now. And 4 over 2 is the same as 2 whole. And so if I reduce in advance, I only have 1 times 2 in the numerator and 1 times 1 in the denominator. And I skip to that step. So if that makes sense, great. If not, great dish. We do want to start understanding these ideas more and more. But in this case, didn't take long either way. But more and more, I would encourage you, if you can, when dealing with multiplication with fractions, if you can simplify things before you multiply, I highly recommend that. It'll make other parts of the course easier to understand as well. Lastly, I have right here 2.5 divided by 4/5. So first of all, I want to change this to a improper fraction, just like I did before, 5/2. But as well, instead of dividing by 4/5, I want to change it to multiplying by 5/4. All right, now if I look at this, nothing actually simplifies. If I look at my numerator and my denominator, there's none of my factors. We say simplify here. So I'm just going to go straight to 5 times 5, which is 25, over 2 times 4, which is 8, which is a great answer as an improper fraction, but I want to change it to a mixed number. 8 goes into 25 3 whole times, because 8 times 3 is 24, and there's only 1/8 left. And there's the answer we want to have. All right, so keep in mind, again, lots of options, but in general, multiplying and dividing, the actual calculations tend to be a little bit easier than adding or subtracting.